Hi, students. Welcome to video 14 on sustainable agriculture. So, the goals of sustainable agriculture is basically to be able to feed the world population without degrading the environment. So, we want to do things like enhance the soil quality, minimize our use of non renewables, but we want to allow for the organic farmers to actually be able to make money. Unfortunately, usually with organic farming, it requires a lot more labor than traditional industrial agriculture. So, we're going to talk about that as well. So there's a bunch of different ways that I can be sustainable. So the way I've done it is I've numbered them, and then I'm talking about things that go with that number. So number one is improving soil quality. So the first thing I can do is I can rotate my crops. What this means, as we saw from the sustainable farm um, animation, we can we can actually plant different things for each year. This is going to help keep the nutrients in the soil. It's going to reduce the erosion problems that we have. It also controls for pests. We don't have to spray as many synthetic pesticides. Um, and basically, we're going to be able to control the weeds and everything that's growing a lot better. We can also apply green manure, which is animal and plant waste. So think if you cut your grass, instead of, you may have a bag on the lawnmower, that will be the green manure, the stuff that goes in that bag. So you can actually collect that and spread it out around your crops, and you can actually use that. So these are some of the animal waste that you can use. We're not supposed to use dog and cat waste because of the things that we give them. It has chemicals in it that we don't really want to put on our food. But then all the other animals have more of a natural diet. We can also add compost, which makes soil kind of a spongy texture, and it will hold water a lot better. So this will improve our structure. We can add limestone if we have acid problems. And it's one of the things that limestone will help correct is the nutrient uptake issue. So if your soil is too acidic, one of the reasons why the plants won't grow is they literally cannot take up the nutrients that they need from the soil. Another thing we need to focus on is reducing erosion. So the first one was improving fertility. This one is reducing erosion. So we can do something called no-till. Basically, what that means is that you are not going around with a big tractor and disturbing the top 6 inches of soil or so and basically turning it over. So this is an example of here's an old farm area. Like you can see the old crops were corn stalks, and now we planted soybeans. So we didn't turn the land up. We just straight up planted the soybeans in rows along the corn stalks. This creates less erosion because you're not disturbing the soil. Basically, the soil can't be blown away. One of the big drawbacks about this, though, is we have to spray for weeds a lot because if you're planting stuff where other stuff has already grown and basically not starting over, then you'll get weeds growing from the other material that was there. We can also plant perennial crops. Basically, these are things you don't have to plant every year. They basically just grow back. So you don't have to spray pesticides. You don't have to continually plow. There's no reason to do tillage if you already planted that thing there. And you basically just get that plant forever. You can also rotational graze your cows or whatever you have, sheep that are feeding. And we talked about this a little bit. Basically, you just rotate around so that this plot over here will come back and eventually look like what number 4 looks like after a while. And you just keep rotating them around. You can also do things differently with how you plant. So if you're on a sloped area, you want to plow perpendicular to the slope. So that's what contour plowing is. In other words, I don't want to plow going straight down the mountain in lines because then when my rain hits, it's going to cause runoff to go straight down. It's going to take all the nutrients out. So I want to plant my crops going in a circle down the elevation of the mountain. I can also terrace if I'm on a slope. And this is basically making places that would not normally be farmable places where I can farm. So I make steps on the side of a mountain, and then I can farm on the little steps that I've made. And it will slow the runoff when it actually rains. I can plant in strips. I can alternate the different types of plants that I'm doing in rows. So that's called strip cropping. So here you see maybe corn or something in a row, and then beside it is something that's smaller. I can put windbreaks. I can plant trees at the edge of my farm so that when the wind blows, it hits the tree and it does not take the soil with it. I could also do a cover crop. We will see this when we go across the street from to the farm. They basically plant something first, and that basically stabilizes the soil, and then I plant something else. I kind of mow that away, and then I plant my cash crop. So cover crop is something that grows first, and it protects the next plant that I'm trying to plant. We can also do organic agriculture. So this is its own category. So organic agriculture is not using synthetic pesticides or fertilizers. In 1990, we passed the Organic Foods Production Act. And basically what that did was it allowed a department of the Department of Agriculture to oversee organic farms. So you have to do certain things for your food to be labeled as organic. And we actually now have people that regulate that, and they go out to farms and they make sure that the farms are truly being organic. The biggest problem with organic food is it costs a lot more because you can't use those synthetic things that make it cheaper to produce the food. So instead of synthetic pesticides and fertilizers, we have to use like compost, or you can actually still use pesticides, but it has to be a natural pesticide. And all of that is things that cost more to produce, which is why the organic foods cost more. So our organic food has grown. This is a graph showing you from 2002 to 2012, and has just continued to increase the number of farms, the amount of food that people are buying. Basically, sales have just skyrocketed. So people are really interested in organic agriculture and organic farming, so we can provide the food. The farmers can actually still make money because we are so interested in this. We can also free range graze our animals. This is another way that we can sustainably farm. Most of the land in the United States is used for grazing animals. And some of the benefits is more ethical or humane than the CAFOs that we talked about before. You don't have to use antibiotics and medicines because they're not all clumped together. There's less risk of disease. There's less fossil fuels that you're going to be using. And there's also the animal waste. Instead of having to put it in a lagoon and deal with it, it just goes right back into the land and it becomes fertilizer. There are some negatives to it. It does require more land because they're free range out. They're not in small, little, densely packed CAFOs. It costs more money because it requires more land. You can have water pollution, so the animals are going to be pooping, and if it's not on the land, it can go into the water. Even from the land, it can run off into the water, and that can cause some water pollution problems. And we can have an issue of the tragedy of the commons where we are overgrazing our cattle too much. So some acts that are related to grazing. In 1934, we had federal rangelands were changed from common areas to permits. So you had to have a permit to go in and graze. However, the permits cost very little money. So a lot of people argue that it's basically free range. It's basically still a commons, and we're overgrazing because it's so cheap. The government spends about 7 times more on managing these areas than it actually costs for the permits. So basically, we have subsidized grazing. We have given extra money so that people go and graze more. And finally, the fifth thing we can do to be sustainable for our agriculture is we can implement what we call integrated pest management. Basically, this is a combination of a bunch of different methods used to control pests, insects. It's not just spraying things with chemicals. So here's kind of our pyramid of interventions. What do we do before we get to chemicals? So you definitely need to make sure that you have these methods down. The first thing we do is cultural. So we would do things like crop rotation. That would be like literally when we're planning our farm, we would make sure that we're doing things up front that prevent us from having to do pest control later. Then after that, once I've planted them and the plants have grown, I can mechanically remove things. I can literally go in with a net. I can put in a trap that's sticky, and I can try to catch the pest that way. The third thing I can do is I can do biological control, which if you remember from our invasive species discussion, that's when I bring in a predator of the species to come and try to eat it. Which we know can cause more problems sometimes. And the final thing I'm going to do is apply chemicals. So once I've done all of these other things, my chemical synthetic pesticides are kind of the last alternative. And still, if I'm going to spray them, I'm going to spray them, in a smart way that's not going to use too much. So here's the first cultivation methods: crop rotation, intercropping, meaning planting different things together, kind of like this strip cropping. You can also plant pest-resistant varieties of foods. And then you can make habitats for predators to come in. So these are some banana insects that will come in and basically eat the different stuff. Or these are the insects that will eat the bananas. And then if I want to protect my apples and bananas, these are some things that can come in and they can eat those prey items. So these are my apple protectors. One thing to note is integrated pest management is not the same as organic. I can still spray synthetic chemicals. It's just kind of my last option. So just to make sure that you're not confusing those two. It can be organic if I'm stopping at that biological section, but if I continue on to chemical spraying, then it cannot be organic. All right, that's it. Bring your questions tomorrow.